Why do people smoke? Like when you do the research, like what's the reason?
It's really interesting to remember that this is a product that's been in the DNA of the human race for millennia. So there's three main reasons why people smoke. So the first one is the ritual. The second is the nicotine pharmacology. And then the third one is sensory.
Let's say in Pakistan and other countries as well. With government, what are some of the challenges which you are facing a lot?
I think a government probably wants to trust, if that's the right word, its own Department of Health.
And they have their own agendas and obviously.
That's the thing.
And how are you trying to sort of like manage this whole illicit market?
From the consumer's perspective, it's cheaper.
And I think in Pakistan, it's like roughly 25 million people are using like tobacco products. So what are you guys doing to, let's say, move them from a traditional cigarette to these products?
We need to have all the stakeholders aligned in terms of government, regulators, public health, tobacco control, the industry, consumers. A lot of things have to go right.
What's the role of AI in all of this?
Our next ambition is that we create an AI version of the Omni so that any person, regardless of their background, could come in and they could say,
James, thank you so much for taking the time out. Talk to me a little bit about your background, and then we will come to why you are in Pakistan.
Yes, great. So I'm a chemist by training. So I did my first degree in my hometown of Belfast in Ireland. And then I had the opportunity to work in Europe. So I worked in France and Netherlands for about a year and a half, working in the printing inks industry as a formulation chemist. And then I went and did a PhD in the University of Edinburgh in Scotland. And then I had the opportunity to go to Japan to do postdoctoral studies. So I was in Japan for 18 months at the Nara Institute of Science and Technology. And then I wanted to go back to Europe. So I was applying for a job. And I saw an advertisement for British American Tobacco as part of their management traineeship scheme. And I applied for it and it was successful. And that was back in 2005. And then I've spent the last 20 rich years.
So this is technically your first job, you can say, like a proper.
Well, I had that year and a half in the printing inks industry. Okay. So I was working for BASF and Akzo Nobel. So I had some flavor of working internationally, but I really felt I wanted to progress, my studies, so that would give me a sustainability for my career. I
think you're the first sort of chemist who actually studied, the whole thing I'm meeting. So where did the interest of like becoming a chemist like came from? Was it like in your family or like what were you thinking? Because normally like at least in Pakistan when you're growing up, it's mostly the engineer or a doctor or like sometimes you will go to the creative industry. But where did this like chemist sort of, thing came to me?
I think for me, it didn't come from my family. None of my family are chemists. I think it came from in my childhood. I really enjoyed making things, and whenever I got into university, I felt that I was a better learner in project work than I was sitting in classes. And in chemistry, offered that optionality of doing laboratory work, which I really, really liked.
And so right now, so you're heading a research sort of arm of BAT. What do you guys do there? Because normally the perception of a normal person would be there's this company who sells cigarettes. So what is to do with the research? And then like building this whole like such a big facility in the UK. So talk to me a little bit about what do you guys do and when did you guys thought of starting this sort of vertical?
Excellent. I'm really glad you opened that question as well, because when I joined BAT back in 2005, it was a one product company. We just sold cigarettes. And the R&D that I walked into in Southampton, and remember I was coming from Japan, which was technologically and very high in innovation. It was very basic. There was sort of chemistry, filters, paper, tobacco blending. So it was quite a sort of simplistic R&D. So we had different types of blends, we had different filter additives and this sort of thing. And we did a series of laboratory studies, clinical studies. And we could prove that we could take away some of the harmful chemicals by these different technologies.
From a normal cigarette.
From a normal cigarette. But the point and the conclusion we arrived at was that whenever you burn a cellulose-based material like tobacco, you form probably the largest chemical reaction known to man. We form smoke. Yeah.
And then what's the next step?
So we actually had a bit of a crossroads at that moment, because we knew that it would be possible to make a nicotine aerosol. But at that stage, we really believed that would be a pharmaceutical product. So these are quite early days, 2010. And it was actually the evolution of the early electronic cigarettes about 2010, 2011, that what we found was that consumers really in the UK and the US were probably the first sort of major consumer bases to take up these products. We realized that actually these products were effective for smokers to switch to. And so therefore we then entered into an innovation a program to develop our first electronic cigarette. And we launched that in July of 2013.
Wow. And why do people smoke? Like when you do the research, like what's the reason? Is it just like, what do people get out of that? Like, especially in terms of like when you do the research, one is obviously people are just used to it. But like in terms of like, if you go into a research, like what's the reason?
I think first, before we go into the specific reasons, I think it's really interesting to remember that, mankind has been using tobacco for, 8 to 10 millennia. So this is a product that's been in the DNA of our in the DNA of the human race for millennia. So there's three main reasons we believe why people smoke. So the first one is the ritual. People like the ritual, the puffing, the inhaling, the holding the cigarette. The second is the nicotine pharmacology. So the nicotine effects, the relaxation, the de-stress, the concentration. And then the third one is the sensory. And the sensory is broken into two bits. Sensory on one hand can be flavor, taste, and on the other hand, it can be mechanics. So the puff resistance whenever you draw. So you have the combination of those three factors is why people smoke.
And other than nicotine, what are the other sort of things which you have, like when you did the research, it just sort of came out like people also get their nicotine? Is it just a cigarette? Because for some people, it might be a tea as well.
Yes.
Like what are the other products? Like, do you have a bit of have you guys done any research around that as well?
Yeah, so we recently, it's a really interesting question, because if I just take us back to our strategy for a moment, in that, we were a company that produced only cigarettes. We rearticulated our group strategy in July of 2023. And what we said then was that by 2035, so in 10 years' time, we want to be a predominantly smokeless business. So that means 50% of BAT's revenue and profit will come from the smokeless products, heated products, vapor products, nicotine pouches. We also feel that there's a future in delivering products that have other novel actives, and they could be things like caffeine or taurine or theanine, that then could, realize, benefits for consumers. It could be focus, it could be relaxation, it could be reward. And we launched this product called Ride a couple of years ago in Australia. We're now in Canada and the USA. And these are shot products, which have different combinations of these actives in a drinks shot. And consumers use these here products to realize different consumer benefits.
And right now, like especially in Pakistan, I think outside Pakistan, we have seen there are a lot of other products as well. Some of the companies, I was just reading somewhere, going into a coffee sort of business as well, and sort of adding that into a product variation. But with your company, have you guys thought of like going into a bit of a traditional sort of products as well? As an example, just a thought, like why do we don't have like maybe a chocolate, like after a lunch or a dinner, you just have a chocolate and you just get your nicotine.
So I think one of the first things is that we won't mix nicotine with any other actives. That's a company position that we took. We just want to have nicotine in our smokeless products. And I think where we are on our transformation. So at the end of last year, about 18% of BAT's business was in smokeless products, 82% in cigarettes. So the focus over the next, the next sort of 5 years is how can we really make a big inroads in terms of those 1.2 billion smokers around the world to switch them to smokeless products. And then how can we move towards making ourselves a predominantly smokeless business? So I think the words at the moment in the business are focus in terms of that switching from cigarettes to smokeless products, and maybe the other products, they'll come a bit later on.
And in other parts of the world where you guys are running, like if you do a comparison, in which countries people are using less cigarette and more of the other products?
That's a great question. And what we've seen is, if you look at BAT, we're in 145 markets.
What's your biggest market?
In the world today? The USA.
Okay.
Yeah. And in terms of those different markets, we're in 82 markets with our smokeless products. Some markets around the world, we can't introduce our smokeless products. So, for example, like the smokeless products are banned in Brazil, for example.
And what's the reason for that?
The regulator doesn't want to accept these here products as part of their strategy on tobacco.
Okay, but what's the benefit they are getting? Because technically for health benefits, it's like better to have a smokeless, products. Yeah. So why are they not integrating that?
Well, it's a great question, and that's the question we've been asking for the last 5 years. Is why would you not want to be like other countries that have seen smokeless products come into the market and then a significant decline in smoking? But to go back to your original question about sort of penetration of markets, we have about 25 markets around the world where we have more than 30% of our business is smokeless. We have big markets like Japan, which is now predominantly smokeless business. So 51% of our business in Japan is in heated products. And right up to countries like Sweden, where we'd have 80% of our business would be in smokeless products. But one thing, I think, one key conclusion is that upon the introduction of these smokeless products in the markets, if they're in the right regulated environment, you do see a sharp decline in cigarette smoking as smokers migrate to these products. And if you look at a country like Sweden, which introduced smokeless products a couple of decades ago, they've realized really profound public health benefits. Sweden has the lowest incidence of smoking-related morbidity or mortality, disease and death in the whole of the EU. And furthermore, if I just make one last little point you might find interesting for your listeners is, so the Swedes have this product called snus. It's a little pouch and you place it under your lip and you extract the tobacco and the nicotine and flavors. Snus is actually banned in the EU. So when Sweden joined the EU in 1995, the EU wouldn't allow snus into the other countries. And there was a group of scientists recently did some modeling that if the EU had the health outcomes of Sweden, 3.5 million people could have been saved in the last 10 years.
Wow.
So the public health benefits are...
But what's the reason, why the governments are not then sort of adding these products? What are their... what's in their mind?
Yeah.
What are they thinking?
I think a lot of the stakeholders around regulators are entrenched in some of their traditional beliefs where they believe in a sort of mentality of what used to be termed the quit or die. That this was the sort of the old tobacco control mantra. But what I think this tobacco harm reduction offers is it's a third way. And it's an opportunity for people who want to continue to use nicotine to use it in a safer form. And you see countries around the world are really benefiting from that there.
Also, when we hear about the new products, nicotine pouches and few other things, one of the perception which a normal person have is so there is one cigarette and then there is a pouch.
Yes.
And a lot of times people think the pouch is or vape as an example is more dangerous than having just a cigarette, because with that it's always with you. You're in a meeting or you're anywhere, you're just having that. But cigarette, at least you need to go out and smoke and come back.
Yeah.
So in terms of the research, what are the findings over there?
Yeah, no, it's a great question. And So what we did when we started off in this journey back in sort of the 2013 with the smokeless products, in parallel, as well as creating new products, we designed a scientific assessment framework. And what this was a 9-step framework based in 3 areas. So we looked at the emissions, so what came out of the product, the exposure. If I was a smoker and I switched to the product, what would I be exposed to? And then risk. So if I switch from cigarettes to a vapor product or a nicotine pouch, does the risk of smoking-related disease decrease? And so this 9-step framework, which we published in a peer-reviewed journal, it took about sort of 5 years per product to complete. So it was a really substantial piece of research, and we did that in all 3 categories: heated products, vapor, nicotine pouches. On that, there we published 268 peer-reviewed papers. So that's looking at the chemistry, toxicology, clinical studies, risk studies, population modeling. So we're very confident now that if you don't have combustion, you form much simpler products, much simpler aerosols, nicotine pouches, much simpler contents. These have typically less than 90% fewer toxicants than cigarette smoke. We did a range of toxicology tests, greater than 90% reduction in toxicity. The exposure, whenever a consumer switches from cigarettes to these products, their exposure is similar to people who quit using all tobacco use. And that's the same for the risk indicators as well. So we've really spent the last sort of 10 years fully characterizing, fully researching these 3 categories of products, because we truly believe they're going to be the future of British American tobacco.
And if you see in these 3 products, out of cigarette, the pouches and the vaping, like when you do the research and when you've talked to a general public, which of the product people prefer more? I guess as a natural sort of habit.
It's a superb question, and it's a really, really important question, because there unfortunately is no one size fits all. And what we've seen around the world is, so if you take Japan, for example, I talked about with 51% business there, that's all through heated products. If you look at, say, the Nordics,
and when you say heated,
so these are electronic heating devices, and then you have a tobacco substrate, and then the volatiles get heated off and you inhale it. The Nordics, you have the nicotine pouches. Pakistan, you've got the nicotine pouches. And places like the USA is predominantly vapor, and then more recently some modern oral. So in each country, it's quite different and specific to the consumer needs within that country.
And is it also like a difference between East and West? Like in the Eastern, like East of, like, you know, in the world, like people prefer more, and in the West, or is it depend on country to country?
No, I think it's pretty well distributed across East and West and North and South. I think the North and South is probably interesting in that I think the northern countries north of the equator, I think in general, have been faster to embrace tobacco harm reduction, whereas the countries south of the equator have been, I think we've more and more countries where THR hasn't been embraced, and that's where we've had difficulty getting these products into the marketplace.
And when you do the research of, again, making new products, and when you go to the public to ask them about, what are some of the big misconceptions which you have heard? Yeah,
I think first and foremost is around nicotine. And this is probably conflated from the 1970s and 1980s through different public health messages, which for cigarettes, that was a different era. I think a lot of consumers, a lot of medical doctors, there's been so many surveys in the UK, the US, different countries across the world. Typically around 80% of medical doctors believe that nicotine is carcinogenic, so causes cancer. When in fact, it's not even on any of the WHO lists. There's been so many regulatory and public health bodies. FDA have been very clear about it's combustion that causes the harm. It's not the nicotine. The NHS and our own UK, they have stated on their website, nicotine is while addictive is relatively harmless to health. So this if I had a magic wand, the one thing I would do would be to correct that misperception on nicotine.
And when you talk to the governments, you said about NHS and like,
Yes.
let's say in Pakistan and other countries as
Yeah.
well. With government, what are some of the challenges which you are facing a lot? Is it like mostly they don't have an education about what you guys are trying to do? Obviously, like you go and explain and everything, but what are some of the challenges which you face?
Yeah, and I think a government probably wants to trust, if that's the right word, its own Department of Health. And so that's
and they have their own agendas, and obviously
that's the thing. So in the UK, we had quite a progressive harm reduction agenda. I think that's because you had things like National Health Service, Royal College of Physicians, Public Health England came out in strong support of things like vaping. I'll give you an interesting case study. In New Zealand, about 10 years ago, 8 years ago, New Zealand was very, very against vaping, and their smoking rates remained flat. And then the new government came in and began to be much more embracing of harm reduction. New Zealand will be, I think, will be the second country to go smoke free. I think Sweden will be the first. So the WHO has a limit of what they call non-smoking. So if a country gets to 5% smoking incidents, it's termed non-smoking. The 5% is because they always believe there's going to be some incalcitrant smokers who don't want to give up. So Sweden's at 5.3%. New Zealand's at 5.8%. So in a very short space of time, New Zealand made a massive acceleration to almost becoming smoke-free. And I think that's the opportunity for all the countries around the world.
And so, like, if you see these numbers, what is the reason that these countries are sort of embracing this change? Is it the campaigns which you are trying to do? Is it like people are more educated? Is it like a role of government? Like, what's the difference?
Yeah.
Like, what can we learn from those sort of countries?
Yeah, maybe a bit of all the above. I think as we progress in time, the evidence base continues to grow, so the stories about how countries are going smoke-free, the scientific substantiation of the products. I think a very interesting thing as well is that the world we live in today is so connected. You're sitting in Islamabad and you know what's going on in Australia, in 5 seconds. And I think these networks around the world are growing. And I think consumers are starting to realize that there are other options out there. They do want to continue to use nicotine, and they would like to have the opportunity to try these other products.
And like one other thing which people might have that, so you're trying to sort of change the whole ecosystem that people, like you're trying to save the health of a normal person.
Yes.
And moving from a cigarette, which is more dangerous, to, less sort of dangerous. But a normal person could have a question that why don't you just then just shut this off and go into some other business?
Yes.
Because it's technically just moving into another market with the same product.
Yes. So I think this is a great question. And this is a question I think for years that we in the industry would really have struggled with in terms of talking about. And I think there's a couple of things. I think the first thing is, there's many examples today of legacy businesses that want to transform into a new business. So you have it automotive with electric vehicles. You have it fuel, where it's like it was coal and now it's greener fuels, and we're no different. And what you realize in the transformation, having been in the transformation for sort of over 10 years now, the legacy business pays for the transformation, and there's no other way around that economically. That if we didn't have, the cigarette business to pay for the transformation, we wouldn't have the new business. And the question is then, how quickly can we get from the legacy business to the new business? And then I think a second point, and I think it's important as well, is I think any prohibition approach, it doesn't work. I mean, you saw it in the 1920s with alcohol in the US is the famous one. But I'll give you a closer to home story for us. During COVID in South Africa, the government in South Africa banned all sales of tobacco and nicotine products. And so for 6 months in South Africa, BAT couldn't sell any of its tobacco and nicotine products. And in that time, the South African market, it had a rates of illicit cigarettes about 40%. It went to 75% illicit products. So you can have a prohibition approach, but there's a demand for nicotine and tobacco products, and somebody is going to give that supply. And so that's where I think we should be working with, companies who are responsible, companies who work with governments, companies who want to transform, rather than just leaving this demand open to the black market and the criminality that goes with that.
And how are you trying to sort of like manage this whole illicit market? Because obviously there's no like one rule. It's like, in every country, I think your local teams are trying, but like, what is the big issue in that? Is it just like, is it cheaper, or is it like some other sort of factors in all of this?
Yeah. From the consumer's perspective, it's cheaper. And the thing is, we do for every single product we launch, and one of my accountabilities is our product stewardship approach. So what that means is that we evaluate every ingredient, and there's a lot of lists that we have of ingredients we wouldn't have, every material, and then we look at the emissions or the content of the product. So even like in cigarettes, you may be thinking to yourself, why are you doing product stewardship in cigarettes? And we know the long-term effects of cigarettes. What we don't want is start to create new short-term effects of cigarettes. And that's where, even with cigarettes, that's where we can't have illicit cigarettes, because we don't want people just introducing new risks to an already risky product. Furthermore, on the smokeless products, so we are so strict on the manufacturing quality, so strict on the ingredients, so strict on the materials. And what can happen with the illicit products is that those people don't care what goes into the product, because they don't care about the sustainability of the smokeless products business. Where for us, that's our future. That's so we're all in terms of smokeless products.
And recently you guys launched this report, like Omni. Like, what is it about? Like, if you can tell in a very sort of a simple way, is it like a new sort of a unit? Like, how does it's going to work as well?
Yeah, no, thank you. It's a great question as well. In that this is our manifesto for a better tomorrow through a smokeless world, which is our corporate strategy. This is a manifesto and a call to arms, where what we wanted to do was we wanted to create this manifesto that laid out all of our beliefs. It had all of the evidence, both BAT, so all the published research, the 268 papers we published, but importantly, 614 papers, peer-reviewed papers from third parties, scientists from all around the world. And we also wanted to put in there a lot of market stories, test cases, of which Pakistan was one. That's one of our favorite stories. And what we want to do is to present the totality of evidence around tobacco harm reduction. And we wanted to invite society to come and have a dialogue. Because, I joined BAT 20 years ago because I walked into the reception, and behind the reception, there was a statement that said, this is when they only sold cigarettes. They said, we want to be the first company that produces a new range of tobacco products that will over time be recognized by stakeholders as lower risk. I still remember it from 20 years ago. And that's the reason I joined. And that's the reason I'm still here 20 years on. And that's the reason why we're doing the Omni, because we really, really believe that tobacco harm reduction, smokeless products is what's going to bring us to this vision we have of a better tomorrow with a smokeless world.
And why are you visiting Pakistan?
Well, my own personal desire to travel.
And this is your first time.
It's so fabulous to be here. I've heard so many wonderful stories about it. Pakistan is really important for us. It's really important. Pakistan Tobacco Company is a fabulous company. It's been here for 8 decades. It's one of our most proudest companies. And we've such a wonderful people here. And I want to talk about that in a little minute. There's a couple of things about Pakistan you might not know. Pakistan is our what we call our eastern hub for modern oral. So Pakistan, we have invested in a new $40 million facility in Jhelum. I think it's
Jhelum.
Jhelum. Excuse me. It's in Jhelum. And in Jhelum, that's a factory that not just supplies the Pakistan market, it supplies Japan, it supplies several countries in Europe, Greece, France, etc. It supplies several countries in South America. So it's now our number one manufacturing facility in Pakistan. It's a category that's been around since 2019. So it's still a young category. So we really see these two things as being like the tip of the spear for for Pakistan really playing a prominent role for the BAT group. It for me is an example of how a developing country can bring tobacco harm reduction into its strategic agenda, and I think Pakistan could be the blueprint for many other developing countries in terms of how they want to run their public health strategy on tobacco. And if I could just make one little shout out about the colleagues in the Pakistan Tobacco Company, we have over 100 PTC, Pakistan Tobacco Company employees in our BAT countries around the world.
Wow.
Over 100. I think it's a record. So there's superb talents in Pakistan that we're bringing into the BAT group to accelerate our learning. And so I hope that gives you a flavor. One, that the country's strategically important, but the people are strategically important for us as well because there's such a rich talent base here.
And I think in Pakistan, it's like roughly 25 million people are using like tobacco products.
Yeah.
So like, what are you guys doing to, let's say, move them from a traditional cigarette to these products?
Yeah.
And obviously there are like campaigns, but what are some of the strategic sort of moves you have to do?
Yeah.
And where are you guys having some difficulties?
Yeah. I think it's a really important question in that for it to really work, we need to have all the stakeholders aligned in terms of government, regulators, public health, tobacco control, the industry, consumers. A lot of things have to go right for it to progress. And if you look at the countries that have been very successful, we talked about Sweden, we talked about New Zealand. I mean, in the USA, I could never have imagined it. In the USA, in 2027, more people will vape than they will smoke in the United States. It's unbelievable how fast this has happened. And where it may seem early in the Pakistan journey, there's only 500,000 people using modern oral and there's still, I think it's about 14 million smokers. It can happen very quickly. We talked about the New Zealand example. So that's where my sort of call to arms for all stakeholders is to get behind this tobacco harm reduction agenda and make it central to the public health strategy on tobacco.
And what's next for Omni and BAT? Like what are your next sort of plans?
Yeah.
Like in terms of Omni, like what are the next sort of, let's say, 5 steps?
Yeah. So we created Omni last year, putting together all those evidences, both science and the market evidences, and that continues to grow. I mean, when we launched it last September, we had 245 papers. Now, sitting 5 months later, I have 268. So our scientific base increases, the external scientific base increases, and we have more and more market stories. So we launched Omni in September 17th of last year. This is our first market that we're launching Omni International. So this is the handover tonight is from the international team to the Pakistan tobacco team to take Omni and to utilize it for their public health strategy on tobacco. After this, we will now be going around the world with Omni. We will be launching this manifesto in our key markets. But Pakistan's setting the standard. It's the first one, and after that, all the other markets will have to reach the high standards that Pakistan has.
And lastly, what's keep you sort of motivating of doing this work?
Yeah, it's a great question. I joined the company because of this harm reduction agenda, and I often have this thought to myself about. I think my poor wife, for example, right, and she works in financial services, and every day she goes and has to write these reports and all this sort of stuff. And God love her, it's very worthwhile. You do a job, you earn a salary, you keep your family. It's all very worthwhile. I think in our industry at the minute, we have the opportunity to do something so profound of the impact that we could have on mankind if we could switch smokers to lower risk tobacco and nicotine products. It would stand the test of time. And so transformations are difficult, but that's what inspires me every day is that like when I leave BAT, I really hope that we will have been on the other side of that being a predominantly smokeless business.
And lastly, what's the role of AI in all of this? Because now we have seen that how rapidly AI is moving into all of these industries and all the markets.
Yeah.
Do you think it's going to impact your work in a good way or in a bad way?
Yeah.
As well as the research which you did over decades.
Yes.
Maybe the research will sort of increase, decrease, or how will be the overall impact?
Yeah, I think it's such a profound question, and I think the evidence will, for at least I think the next sort of decade, the evidence will remain to be the evidence. I think regulators in public health will still want to see chemistry and toxicology and clinical studies. Where we see AI coming next, specifically on the Omni, is we want to use AI to make the Omni accessible. Not everyone wants to read 373 pages. And so what our next ambition is that we create an AI version of the Omni so that any person, regardless of their background, could come in and they could say, what's the safety profile of nicotine? And then using AI functionality, they get the key bullet points rather than having to read 373 pages, which is interesting for me, but maybe not for everybody else.
James, thank you so much for taking the time out. It's lovely talking to you. And I hope I'll be visiting you in April or maybe in May and to check your facility.
Yeah. But you're more than welcome anytime.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you.